for all of us. It's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.
Today on the show, I've got David Baldwin, founder of Baldwin and an advertising agency located in Raleigh, North Carolina, a recent author, and also a film producer. Today on the show, we talk about David's new book, The Belief Economy: How to Give a Damn, Stop Selling, and Create Buy-in. The belief economy is really a generational story, and we talk about millennials, iGens, and what we have to do as brands today to really gain their attention and honestly regain their trust. I hope you enjoy this episode with David Baldwin. Well, David, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
So we've known each other a long time. We haven't stayed in touch that frequently, but we've known each other for a long time, and I've followed your career. And honestly, I don't know how to describe you. You're a brewer or brewery owner, a ad guy, a film producer, a general do-gooder. How would you describe yourself?
That's interesting. I wouldn't call myself a do-gooder, that's for sure. I think what probably helps me describe myself is the state of the ad industry itself and what it allows you to do now. Because there was a time in advertising where you got into the ad business and you could kind of do this and that, but there was an old joke that, every writer had a screenplay in their desk, in their drawer, but they had to leave advertising to go do it. And now you don't have to leave. Now you can kind of do anything you want to do. And so I think I'm a creative guy with options is really what I would say. But I think that's where we are in the ad business. And that's where we are in culture in general is we have more tools to do the things we want to do. And I've always valued output. That's what I would say. And so I'm always trying to do things I'm interested in. And I've been very lucky to get paid for some of those things, and always curious and trying to always move forward.
Help me understand, what are all the roles you have right now?
Right now, I am the CEO of Baldwin and in Raleigh, which is an advertising design strategy company. And I'm also the CMO of a brewery in Durham, North Carolina, called Ponysaurus Brewing Company.
My favorite beer, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really good. You shouldn't trust me on that, but I'm a little biased, but it's quite fantastic. And then I just wrote a book, so I suppose I'm an author now. I have produced movies. I've been the producer on a couple of movies, and I've helped push a couple of movies forward in sort of a more kind of background fashion. But always what I would say is all the things that I generally do are trying to live into the mission of having some kind of positive impact on the world as I see it. And so, when I was an executive producer on a movie called Art and Copy about 10 years ago, and that movie was about trying to celebrate creativity. We made that movie for clients as much as the ad industry itself, but we wanted to kind of present the people behind the advertising. Advertising as an art form is one of the most prevalent art forms in the history of humanity. It's everywhere. And because of that, you see it everywhere, but you don't know who did the work. You don't know who was behind it. And so that movie was all about showing kind of how the revolution spawned these amazing creative people. And advertising people tend to be a little rebellious, which is kind of funny because we're all capitalists, but that's who's in that movie. And then I became a producer on a movie called The Loving Story, which is a documentary about Richard and Mildred Loving, the most wonderfully coincidental name ever. They were an interracial couple back in the 50s and 60s who it was illegal to be married in Virginia as an interracial couple. And so they took their case to the Supreme Court just to win the ability to be married. And again, I thought that was a very important story that needed to be told, and it ended up turning into a feature, which I had nothing to do with. So now I've written the book, and the book is really, I think, very relevant for what's going on right now. But it's about advertising staying relevant as much as anything, and being a part of creating solutions, and I think it can be a future for our business to start thinking this way, in particular the next 40 years, where millennials and iGen are completely in control of purchasing. So that's kind of what always motivates me. But I don't, it's funny. I don't want to put any sort of noble aspirations around it. I'm just trying to do things I'm interested in and push kind of the things that I believe, and do it in a respectful way that has some kind of impact. That's really what I'm trying to do.
That sounds awesome. I've got one more question about you before we start talking about the book. I love to get to know the person I'm talking to, and I love this question, and I hope you don't mind me asking, is there an experience in your past that defines who you think you've become? Kind of a deep question, but
Well, I'm a recovering Texan. I don't know if that helps. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, in West Texas, which is this really cool little town. And interestingly, it's sort of tucked away from the rest of Texas. But then I went to school in Austin. I grew up around advertising. I feel like I've been in advertising since I was like 12. My mother was a media person, the media director at a little agency there called the Brian Reddig at the time. So I would go into the office and with her and stuff, and you see these guys in the back, like people in the back with drawing boards, and they're drawing stuff, and I was like, okay, that looks cool. Like, what are you doing back there? How are you getting paid for that? And so I was, I kind of grew up around art for commerce, and so it was always an option for me. I think about a lot of kids now coming up, they don't understand that that's an option. So for me, I always knew it was an option. And I was also a musician. And so I was kind of just bound and determined to make my living off of my creative wits. As a creative person, I wanted to do that and realized that I was much better at advertising than I was at music. So, which I still play. I still play guitar and write songs and things like that. But it's just a fun hobby. But I think growing up around the business, seeing what it can be and what it is and the kinds of things we can do, I think was very formative for me and gave me a 20-year head start on a lot of people.
Well, good. Now let's get to the book. The book's title is The Belief Economy: How to Give a Damn, Stop Selling, and Create Buy-in. So first question is, why this book? Why now?
Well, it's funny. My agency now is almost 10 years old. We're in our 10th year, going into our 10th year. And the ground has completely shifted in the last 10 years. And when we started the agency, we thought like, man, the ground has completely shifted from 10 years ago. And everything has just shifted right under our feet. And there's, as we all know, there's a million reasons for that. There's sociological reasons, there's cultural reasons, there's technological reasons, there's just all this stuff happening. But what you have in the center of all of this are millennials and iGen, these two generations taking firm control. And, I think it's funny because 10 years ago, everyone was trying to understand the millennial. They were the young target. Millennials are going to be 38 this year, the oldest ones. So they're in control. They've got kids. I feel like almost every brief that comes across our desks now is, how do we talk to millennial families? It used to be, how do we get to young millennials, this and that. So because of that, the rules have changed. I think the rules of marketing have changed. And I've got two kids. My kids are 21 and 18 right now, and they don't interact with brands. They don't interact with companies. They don't trust corporations. Like, they don't interact in any way the way I did, or I think previous generations did. They're very, very savvy to a sales message. Like, they'll turn that off pretty fast. They don't watch TV. They watch Netflix. They watch YouTube. They just don't interact with anything the way we used to. And they also really care about what companies are up to, and they'll find out really fast. I'm talking about the generation as much as anything. And so you've got these two generations coming up, spending all this money, and Accenture estimated millennials by 2020 is controlling $1.4 trillion of spending. That's profound. And then right behind them are iGen, which I believe are about 600 billion. So part of that number is the influence that these two generations have on everything around them, the way they spread messages socially, all the things that they do. They are in control, and they're in control for the next 30 to 40 years. So we better figure out what they're about. We better figure out how they're wired, and we better figure out how to change the way we talk to them, because commercials, quote unquote, don't work anymore like they used to. Now, that doesn't mean tactical advertising doesn't work, and it doesn't mean that you get rid of your day-to-day stuff. But as a brand, you need to start thinking about your impact, and you need to put that into your briefs. Like, what's the impact you're trying to have as a company, as a brand? And so that's why I wrote the book. So the book is kind of basically, at its sort of heart is how do you kind of help turn your brand into a verb and think about the brand's behavior a little bit harder than maybe you used to. And the same discipline you used to put around sort of your persuasion and your selling methods, you put it into like, what's the behavior you're creating and putting out into the world.
Well, so I did learn a lot about you in this book, and I learned you hate the word consumer about as much as I do. You really love these two generations, millennials and iGens, and you're a fan of conscious capitalism. But maybe you could just help me, because I think I was reading too fast, but maybe you can help me define what you mean by the belief economy. What does that mean to you?
Well, the belief economy, as defined in the book, is the economic buying powers of millennial and iGen generations. That's what it is. That's the economy that we're speaking into. It is not, I think one of the mistakes and possibly poor articulation on my part has been that it's a political agenda. It is not a political agenda at all. In fact, what you're seeing is these generations bonding into their belief systems and their value systems on the right, on the left, and in the middle. And a great example of that is Chick-fil-A, right? So Chick-fil-A, you have this very conservative stance on same-sex marriage and things like that. Well, there's an entire sort of cohort of people who go crazy for that and say we need to boycott. And then there's an entire cohort of that says we're going more. So this is not about politics. This is about getting your values and your belief system aligned with the people that are kind of out there, maybe don't know it yet, but are aligned with your system and then love your products. If you make a crappy product, there's nothing we can do, right? I think I have to sort of start from, if your product's shit, nobody can help you. We can get people to buy it once maybe, but they're not going to buy it twice. So, but if you make a good product and you are not clubbing seals, it really is getting to kind of what you do, getting your value system really clear and creating behavior around it. And by part of the behavior is communication. And so it is bigger than advertising. It's much bigger than advertising. What I do think is very, very important, though, is that there are a lot of brands out there that they don't have CSR programs. They're not tied into some kind of social thing. And yet I think they can still create shared value with their communications. The behavior in their communications can create that. And I think a great example of that is Always, right? With the Like a Girl campaign. I don't know that Always is or is not some socially sustainable. I have no idea. I don't have their documents. I don't know what they do. I don't know what their supply chain is and all that stuff. But I do know that they have created shared value in the world with that conversation around what it means to be a girl, the confidence around it of being a girl. And obviously their belief system is based somewhere around the notion of self-esteem and confidence. And they've created all this behavior around it. Now, that doesn't mean, I guarantee you, we can go find a commercial on YouTube right now where they're showing the blue liquid going into the absorbent pad, So it's not saying don't do those daily things, but they've found a much bigger lens and a much bigger place to speak from about what they do. And I think it's been very successful.
What are are there three things that you think companies or brands should be doing to compete in this belief economy?
The first thing is getting very, very honest about who you are. You have got to figure out who you are and what your values are. And if you turn those values into behavior, it's funny, like most strategic documents have a tone of voice and then they have 4 words and they have, authentic, confident, they have these 4 words. What we would say is, what's the behavior versus the words? Like, how do you turn those words into behavior? What behavior do those things lead to? So start thinking of your brand as a verb. And the way we define a brand here, it's a set of behaviors based on an authentic belief system. That's what a brand is. So what do how do you go to market? What do you want to make? How do you make it? How do you sell it? How do you talk about it? All of those things are part of that. And it has to start at a strategic level. Now, a lot of companies already have that figured out. A company like Chobani seems to have a pretty good handle on that stuff. But then there are other companies that clearly, you just watch communications coming out of any company, and you can kind of tell whether they know who they are or not. And so, I think kind of getting around that idea. So number 1 is defining your values by far. And then number 2 is doing it, creating those behaviors around it. So what was your question? You wanted to know what the third thing was?
Yeah, well, if those 2 are great. I mean, if there is a third, that's awesome. But
third to me is then living it kind of top to bottom. Because I think one of the things that I think's interesting about what's happening now is you can take, if you this notion of shared value, you can take that and back down from your marketing and your advertising back into the company. It goes both ways. And so a company can put a stake in the ground and it actually then start looking at the way they do things. I think Paul Pullman from Unilever is doing that. They have very, very clearly taken a stand as a company to make sure all of their brands are having a positive impact. And they're now looking at the supply chain for everything, for how they do everything. So it's kind of gone, again, I do not have their strategic documents in front of me, and maybe this was preceding it, but you kind of look at the Campaign for Real Beauty, where I think most of this sort of started for them. And now that it's sort of beautifully infecting the entire company, where they're concerned with this all the way through. So Paul Pullman is a bit of a visionary on that, I believe. So I think the third thing is really living it day to day and knowing that you're going to, it's a journey. It's a journey, and the kind of first step is the first step.
Well, I would encourage anyone listening to buy the book. I've gotten a lot out of it. I generally am a believer in almost everything you talk about, especially in the first 7 chapters. But as I read it, maybe it's me being cynical or pragmatic. I wanted to counterpoint, because I think beliefs are important today, but I feel like, institutions in some ways are failing us, and maybe I don't know which comes first, right? The chicken or the egg, but incomes are stagnant. Corporations and institutions, they're just not that trusted anymore. And they're not really great problem solvers, or at least the vast majority of them. There are exceptions to any rule. And so by standing up for something you get to stand out and become something people are willing to potentially trade up for. And maybe advocate if we're really lucky. Am I just being a cynic, or does that fit within what you see?
No, I think you're 1,000% correct. And I think that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. And that's one of the reasons I want to go preach this, because the trust in corporations is probably around the same as the trust in our sort of political system. I mean, it's very, very low. But there's a bunch of human beings in these companies who have children, who have mortgages, who care about things. So I have a chapter in the book that basically says, don't check your humanity at the door when you go into the office in the morning. And I think that's very important. And I think, again, it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is to get everybody, let's all talk about what impact our company and our jobs are having on the world and on culture and on our kids. It's one of the reasons I hate the word consumer. It's like, it's a dehumanizing term that turns people, it sort of evokes locusts descending on a field, and consuming everything in that field and then moving to the next field. And that's not who we are as people. Certainly some people are that way, but that's not who we are. And I don't believe that's why we're on sort of this journey in this planet that we're on. But I think you're right. But I am optimistic again about millennials coming into the workforce and iGen coming into the workforce. And they tend, again, to be mission oriented. I think one of the reasons you're seeing these generations bounce around in their jobs a lot is because of what you're talking about. I think they come into a company and go, this is it. This is what we're doing. Not for me. So I think they're going to be in charge. Like, they're CEOs now. They're starting to take over everything. And that's great news. And that's why I'm optimistic about the future. And it's one of the canards about the millennial is that they want a trophy and that they're lazy and that they're entitled and all that. No, actually, they believe in stuff and they want to have an impact. And so when they go in and they can't or they don't, they get depressed and they go, I don't want to do this. The notion of sort of punching a clock for 40 years and getting a watch is not something that they're even kind of associated with. So I'm actually very optimistic. That said, I think, there's sort of a train. There's a train heading towards a wall, and we'll see if we have to survive, I think, to get these generations fully sort of in control. And I think iGen coming behind them is even more wired that way. I have this line in the book that millennials want a mission to fulfill them, and iGen wants to fulfill a mission. And I think that's true from what we're seeing right now, is that millennials they're looking to have an impact, and a lot of iGen they know what they want to do and they're doing it. They're bound and determined to do it. I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic about where we're going. I also think that given the work of William Strauss and Neil Howe that I reference in the book, if you actually read any of their work, what their whole thing is predicting the crumbling of institutions and kind of norms. And that's what's happening. We're seeing exactly what has happened over and over again in our history. This is a very predictable time period. I think what's interesting is there's all this technology and sort of social media and AI is coming on. And there's a lot of change happening right now that in the next 20 to 40 years, everything's going to be remade. It just is. And again, think about in the 30s during the Depression in America, before sort of Roosevelt and the New Deal and all of those things, the world got completely remade in 20 years. Completely. And partly because of 2 world wars, of course. But this is all happening with or without us. And so my advice to a brand is, hey, let's do it with you. Let's be a part of the solution. because it's going to happen.
No, it's good advice. It's good advice. So I do have one critique, although it's just maybe where you lost me was in chapter 8. You really doubled down on social media. And I think for smaller brands or niche brands, I think social can be the channel or maybe one of their most important. But for big brands, I feel like they only get bigger from mass awareness and reach over long periods of time, which social is kind of hard.
Yeah, interestingly, television still works.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, how do you think about social and maybe the greater mix? Give you a chance to talk about the bigger mix picture.
Yeah, social is incredibly important. So if that chapter led you to think I thought social wasn't important, I have not done a good job. My point about social was that it needs to be taken seriously as what I would call a new traditional media channel. What often happens with social is it's relegated to the intern. Still, I see it all the time. It's like, well, we'll get an intern on that, and Facebook's algorithm is stronger than your intern and you have to pay. It is a pay for play platform now. It just is. And, that's just Facebook. I mean, so you've got this incredibly complex mix of platforms and strategies that you have to employ. And all I was saying with social is I am very tired of the conversation around social is cheap and fast. And that's all it is. It is cheap and it is fast comparatively. But you look at the content that's winning, it's either sort of an accident, it's by influencers who are personality driven. And by an accident, I mean, it's a cat falling in a toilet that turns into a worldwide phenomenon. Or it's very deliberately beautiful. Like you'll look at some of the things that, what's the company and the store in England that just does these just beautiful films and they run them on TV, but then they become these social phenomenons. The Christmas, just Google awesome Christmas commercial with an old man on the moon. You can engineer viral and you can engineer social, but you have to pay for it. And so kind of taking the accidental / personality driven work off the table, because I think that's really important and you should do it. I'm not saying not to do that stuff. You should absolutely do it. You should think of social media as a new traditional channel. That's all I was saying with that. And the big lie, I think, is that it's cheap and free. It's free and fast. And it's not. It's not free and fast anymore. It used to be, but social media was created. The reason social media was created was to connect human beings. That's why it was created. You had the Facebooks and the LinkedIns and the MySpaces at the beginning that were about connecting people with their friends and fans. And LinkedIn was about business connections. They were not advertising platforms. And so I call it the great social media hoodwink because that's why they were born, but that's not what they are anymore. They still have some functionality for that, thank goodness, and that's wonderful. But there's an algorithm that's driving choice, that's driving what you see, that's driving everything, and a lot of it's paid for. And so you need to start thinking of social media a lot differently than the mindset that I see. I honestly think in 5 years, people are going to laugh at that chapter because I think it is starting to change finally. I just honestly am tired of the conversation of social as this afterthought that you don't have to pay for. It's not true. So that's what that chapter was trying to say, and obviously did so clearly to you. So,
well, I had a feeling it was meant to do something I just didn't understand, which was good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying.
Sure. We'll put this podcast on that page.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the brand that we both blanked on is John Lewis. I did a little looking up.
John Lewis. I was going to say John West, but that's the salmon. Yeah, John Lewis. Yeah, just check out the John Lewis commercials. But again, those are beautifully produced, wonderfully executed, great storytelling that are then dispensed onto the internet, with a paid strategy, and they end up being these huge viral things. So they go against everything that's sort of the free, fast, and goofy. They don't do any of those things, and yet they're incredibly successful every year.
Good. Well, you've talked about a lot of brands so far, but are there brands you think are going to win in the belief economy?
I think that any brand that's true to who they are, again, I'm going to just go back. If you make a crap product, you're kind of in trouble. But, I think if you're being true to who you are and you are smart about getting aligned with the people out there that love that, I think you can win. You have to create some kind of value and solve a problem for people. And that's why, again, this isn't about, quote, doing good, unquote. It's about solving problems for people. And sometimes that problem might be delighting. I think from a communication standpoint, from the advertising industry, sometimes that's just delighting them with a wonderful message and brightening their day. But it's also with kind of needs to be aligned around what you do. And that thing that you do should be good. And I don't mean good as in a moral sort of objective, or subjectively moral good. I just mean that it solves a problem. So it's more important than ever. I have a chapter in the book called David Ogilvy Must Die, and it's not picking on David Ogilvy, who was a genius, but it's that whole era of persuasion, just persuasion that's a tool now. That's not the tool. I think we're in a post-disruption era as well. And I think disruption is a tool, not the tool.
Interesting. Speaking of tools, I love books that do this, by the way, but you provide kind of a set of tools and questions and even a framework to work through this and get started on your own. But I'm curious, maybe beyond that, would you give people any advice that are just starting out to try to figure out how to compete in the belief economy?
Absolutely. There's a great quote, and I don't know who said it. I wish it was me, but it wasn't me. But the best time to plant an oak tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. You've got to get started on this journey. You've got to get aligned around what your belief system is and what your values are, and beyond sort of a strategic document that has 4 words on it. And I think just starting that journey is the most important thing. And that's why I think there is enough to hold a 2-day seminar in that book for internally. An internal department can take the exercises in that book and do it. Of course, we would love to help lead some of those seminars, but that's not why I did it. I really wanted the book to be inclusive. And again, I wrote the book to actually have an impact. And I didn't want to just say at the end, like, give us a call and we'll help you find, I wanted people to be able to take this book and even you can take the exercises and riff on them as well. So I think just getting started is the most important thing, and realizing you have an impact. Every brand has an impact. And what is it? Is it good or is it bad? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it consuming? Is it sustainable? Is it whatever it is? Like, you're having one. So now figure out what that is and make sure it's what you want it to be.
Well, okay. So stepping back from this book and just getting back to you again, are there brands or companies or causes that you think other people should be taking notice of?
Well, I think the biggest cause that we all need to lock hands on, particularly in America as Americans, is just civility. We are behaving horribly to each other. And I believe we are saying things to each other online that we would never say to each other to our faces. And so we just created this thing called trolltax.org.
Oh, yeah, I did see that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so trolltax.org was a consortium of 2 agencies and some developers. And we were all talking, and this friend of mine, Seth, had an idea. And he said, hey, what if we jujitsu'd trolls by taking whatever they're trolling and allowing people to make a donation in the name of whatever they're trolling? And so we thought, well, that's pretty cool. It's pretty fun. There's an app, I think, that did something like that, but we wanted to make it actually seamless, where you don't have to open an app. So you can it's a Chrome extension. You can literally enter the tweet and it sends you right to it through the extension. But the idea is just, if you're, and this is not a right now, probably the causes probably tend to be a little bit more progressive, but it's not meant to be a ideological tool. It's meant to be against trolling. And so we created this thing. Again, we worked with a bunch of companies, and part of the ampersand of Baldwin and is we're completely comfortable in the sandbox with internal creative departments at clients, with other agencies, with production companies. We don't care who we work with. We're totally cool with it. So we all came together and made this thing happen. And it's just around part of the values of my company is to try to have a positive impact on the world. And we thought, what if we can sort of try to help shun some of the kind of incivility happening? But, there's a misunderstanding of civics in our world now, and in particular, the just vitriol that people are speaking to their fellow Americans. And we've turned each other into enemies. People literally think that the other side is an enemy to the country. That's insane. There certainly are. I think if you're carrying a tiki torch, I would consider you an enemy. But I mean, I think that's a very small percentage. And I would ask, what can brands and companies do in that conversation? How do we forward that? There's a brand out there. We don't know which one it is right now, but there's a brand out there that's perfectly suited to actually manage that and sell a shitload of stuff. Because this is, I'm a capitalist, man. The point of this book is to help people sell more stuff, but it's to consider your impact while you're doing it. That's, again, getting back to connected capitalism and conscious capitalism. It's not about not selling stuff, and it's not about not making money. It's about doing all of that, but also having a positive effect while you do it and considering your impact. And why wouldn't you do that? So if you have the opportunity to make the world work a little bit better, have a positive effect around the people that use your products, why wouldn't you do that? That's my question. Why wouldn't you do that? I don't understand why you wouldn't choose that option. So that's what the book is all about.
Last question. You might have to get your crystal ball out, and I don't know how you feel about predictions, but I'd love to get your thoughts on what you think the future of marketing is going to look like.
Well, I think there's a lot of obvious things happening where advertising is going in-house and all of these things. What I think is interesting is people love to decry the end of advertising, that, it's collapsing. What's collapsing are the old business models. There's more advertising than there's ever been. You can't get away from it. And in fact, I think that's one reason it's so important that we consider the impact of it. So I think the question that agencies in particular, and you asked about marketing, but I'm going to put it into agencies for a second. Agencies need to figure out what their role is in that and how they can play a part in that. And I think in particular, how do we provide more of a business strategy to get to our communications? Because otherwise, you're just living in this ready, fire, aim world where how many times do you see the CMO and the CEO out of step with each other, where they're not executing the same vision? And so you have to tie it all together. So I think there's a reason the McKinseys of the world are getting into our space, is they see revenue, but they also see us not doing it. And so I think, A, they're going to be rolling up agencies as much as anything, but B, we need to get into that. And we need to, because I think we're full of people incredibly capable of providing that kind of thinking, that kind of strategy. So I hope that the future of marketing is more enlightened around the impact that we're all having. And I think it is inevitable because of the generations coming up that you're going to have to contend with that, because if you're doing harm, you're in trouble. If you're seen as doing harm, even if you're not doing anything, quote, wrong, unquote, like if you're not doing anything wrong, but you're still creating harm, like you're in trouble.
Right. Good advice. Good advice. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, David.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is so fun.
Marketing Today is brought to you by Atomic. Atomic focuses on unleashing the growth potential for clients we serve. Atomic is a strategic consultancy specializing in business, marketing, brand, and innovation. Our singular goal is to help you accelerate your efforts with the right mix of expertise, analysis, and creativity. Check us out at atomic.com, ATOMCK.com. Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me, with project management by Sarah Williams, audio production by Aaron Campbell, writing and editing by Kevin Greeley, social media support by Megan Woods, art and graphic design by Sarah Dell. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about the show. We love to hear from listeners at info@atomic, ATOMCK.com. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.